Morning, fellas, and
Morning.
thank you once again for that beautiful hymn, Holy, Holy, Holy. And you're right, as you introduced that hymn this morning, um, the mystery of the Trinity is, well, I think we can all take stabs at explaining it, and there's some really good explanations, but it's a mystery. And we're talking about mystery in John 17. I and you and me, and they and us. That's a mystery. I think the closest thing that is within our experience as human beings is the marriage relationship. We often hear at marriage ceremonies, the two of you shall be one flesh, and two individuals being one flesh. And over time, we've all experienced, and maybe both through observation and through maybe personally, is that our spouse, we learn to we can it's proverbial, we can finish each other's sentences easily, and we learn, sometimes we even look like each other. I'm glad Sandra doesn't look like me, but it's a oneness, and that's a way we can understand it. But what Jesus is saying here is that it is actually true outside of the degree of which we experience it. Somehow, within this, Jesus is talking about an experiential relational reality of I and you and me, and they and us. He talks in language we don't talk about, but I think it's just absolutely fascinating looking into this. And that's what we're going to do this morning, look into this whole mystery of relationship. So this morning, I've got actually two titles of this morning. Um, the content of 225 was too long for one time, so I split it into A and B. And there's two aspects, two definite aspects that we'll be looking at. And I'm calling it, for lack of a better terminology, the fundamentals of relationship. And when we think of fundamentals, we think of the bare bones essentials, the building blocks, the things that make up relationship. And that's what part A is about, relationships. And then I added a second, or we can think about it today in part A way that you and I can think about our relationships. That's what today is about. I'm going to propose a different way of thinking about relationships. It shouldn't be out of left field because we've been talking about these same ideas. But this morning, we're gonna again look at it because I just think it's flat out interesting. So, by way of review, last time we finished up with this diagram. I left out the I and you and me, or I, you, and them. But just if you can, in your mind, imagine that within the circle of unity, I, you, and them, as Jesus is talking about in 17:23b. But the outsider, there are outsiders, those outside the faith community. They're looking on. They're looking in to see this relationship, and what they see, according to Jesus, his intent is they see glory. He says, my glory I have given to them, that which you've given to me. And the idea of glory means substance, weight. It means something of recognizable importance. So the outsider looks on, and the and the those within the faith community are to make the move to include those people who are outside, and in that sense of being included, they feel seen, they feel understood, and they feel safe. So that's really the essentials of what we looked at last week. And then And then the outsider then comes into the faith community. They don't come into the faith community to believe ideals. They come into a faith community because they feel seen, understood, and safe. That the world may know that you sent me and you love them just as you love me. That's the text. This is what people want, and it is that which brings life in the here and now. Life and love go hand in hand, of which we'll talk about. Actually, I think it'll be next week. We acknowledge that according to Jesus, the world participant is to make the move towards the faith community. He's very clear on stating those there are those who are outside of the faith community, and there are those that are within the faith community. And the intent of Jesus is to bring those on the outside into the faith community. However, I think a very important factor within this, the way Jesus is talking about it, it's up to the member of the faith community to include the outsider, to create what I call create space, which is illustrated here, so that the other can be seen, understood, and safe. That's where the rub has been within our experiences, because of the mindset of the other has to come and jump the barrier and join us. And Jesus is talking about this relationship as in reverse. The member of the faith community is the one to make the first move. We discussed our thoughts on this topic, and that was last week. This morning, just a minute, Bill, so that the world may know that you sent me and you love them just as you loved me. That's the text. Go ahead, Bill. You're muted.
The previous slide, I'm just a touch confused. Who makes the first move? I mean, at one point you said the outside makes a move towards the faith community, and so the person in the faith community makes a move to the outsider. Is that simultaneous, or who?
Well, I don't.
I'm a little confused. Who does the first move?
What I'm holding to is that it is the responsibility of the member of the faith community to reach out and create space for the other.
Okay.
And so that when that happens, a good thing happens. They feel seen. I think within much of our way of thinking in a broad perspective, Christian people objectify those people who are outside, and
Right.
nobody likes it.
But your first line implied that the person outside had to make the first move.
The what? Oh,
the first line of the last slide implied the outsider.
Was it the language or through the dynamic?
Can you put the first slide back up?
Yeah. So I'll do the animation.
I'm sorry about all that. I didn't mean to drag you through that.
Okay.
Keep going.
Of course, I'm summarizing, Bill, but my intent is, yes, there is a movement from the outsider into the insider, but that's after the people within the faith community are reaching out.
Okay, because the next two bullet points that popped up kind of threw me for a loop.
Oh, it's this people want. They want to be part.
Yeah, keep going.
Oh.
Keep. It pops up at the top.
Oh, okay.
There we go. It says, we acknowledge that according to Jesus, the world participant is to make the move towards the faith community.
Yep.
And then so I'm wondering who's moving here.
Okay, but notice the big but.
Yeah.
We are also saying that it is the member of the faith community who is to make the first move.
Okay. You see why I was a little bit confused?
No, but
okay. Okay, go on to the next slide.
Well, yeah, I mean, I may have not worded it. Yeah, Carl, what are your?
I was just going to say quickly, I think that's something that's been lost in the church today, and that something is evangelism. On the whole, I don't see the church on the whole reaching out and evangelizing people. And that's the first move in my mind. They're just not doing it anymore.
Okay.
Back a few years, we had all sorts of programs to reach out to the community that don't know the Lord, and it's gone.
Yeah.
I mean, your church, my church, I don't see it happening.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Carl.
Okay.
All right. Hey, Bill, if I could maybe add something to that. I think what he was saying is that the world is looking at us, therefore they're making a move toward the faith community. If the faith community is not already open and allowing or being loving, as I think we said on the last lesson, then there is that movement toward us stops. So we have to have an attitude where when people see us, when people move toward us, they are drawn, they are not, stopped there because we've got our hands up saying, no, you need to be like us before you can come in.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Good. Well said, Jeff. Yeah, is that helpful, Bill? And Vince, go ahead, Vince.
Without without opening up a can of worms, the faith community is, I know exactly what you mean, Mike. I don't know how else you would say it, but the way you did. But I think in practice, the faith community is so multifaceted that by necessity, they require agreement to be a part of their community. Yeah. I've been in churches. By my personal life, I'm experiencing manifestations of the Spirit, speaking in tongues, interpretation, prophecy, that kind of thing. I believe this is still. I'm not a cessationist. I believe it still exists. But when you go to a church that doesn't believe that, just in a practical manner, they tell you, well, you're in the wrong church. You can't be one of us because we don't do that. If you try to practice a Catholic doctrine in a Baptist church, it's not going to take very long for them to say you don't belong here. So I think on a practical side, some of the rejection that people feel is not the church that Jesus is talking about, faith community. It's just it's the little subsets, the clubs. We've decided that we're Pentecostal and you're not. You're not going to find a home here.
Yeah.
I don't know how else you would do it. There's a creed.
that how else we would do it is, I don't have the answer to that, but maybe it'd be good to think about it. What I'm seeing within the text, right or wrong, is those outside the faith community are looking onto something that is really, wow, I want to be a part of this. This is great. And they feel that they are brought in or welcomed in without any strings attached. Exactly what you're addressing, Vince. And what that looks like, I don't know. Yeah. So anyway, let's move on. So we're reading the text, and now this is going to be an introductory slide. Overview. Jesus, and this is really kind of summarizing what we've just talked about. Jesus, and I use the word clearly because I think it states what is. It clearly states that God's love extends to all of humanity. God's love to those within the faith community and to those who are not within the faith community is exactly the same as God's love for the Son. That is I've used that term monumental. That is a big one. That they may know the world that you sent me, and you, Father, loved them just as you loved me. That would really be something good to think about. we can only assume that this love is extended to all humanity, past, present, and future. In other words, I'm making a statement that I'm just assuming Jesus is not talking about 2,000 years forward or 2,000 years prior, but we're assuming the nature of God has not changed and that what was true in the first century AD is true today. So and that's assumed, and I think it's a safe assumption. As we think about this expression of love by God, it might be helpful to look at this subject from a quantum perspective. We introduced that idea a couple of weeks ago, and we're gonna look at that today. And the quantum perspective, it represents that which is true at the very core of day-to-day life, meaning the subatomic world of matter that we are part of because we're made from subatomic stuff. And so we're going to look at this um, and look at relationships from that perspective. Remember, a few weeks ago, we talked about the Newtonian reality, which is what I call big world, is our world that we're used to. But there's the quantum world, and I'm going to define that here in a minute, that is part of the big world because this is what we're made of. And I just think it's interesting. I don't think Jesus was doing a teaching on quantum physics by any means, but I think he knows something about it. But I think it's an illustration of how we might look at relationships by deep diving down into what's true at the subatomic level. So I'm just asking you guys to go with this. And yeah, if it's helpful, fine. And if not, I don't mean to be unhelpful, but I think it's super interesting. Being children of the 21st century, you and I are privileged to have access to this information, which wasn't available 100 years ago or 2,000 years ago. And besides, I think that this is just flat interesting, not because I'm talking about it, but because of the stuff we're going to talk about. So, anyway, let's just put our assumptions on hold for a minute and let's just think about relationships from this perspective. And it'll become more apparent as we get through here. So here's the text, how we naturally think. Let's start here. Now, this is not where modern science is, but I'm going to draw a correlation here. This is how you and I naturally think, and it will become apparent as it builds through. So we think that if we're physicists and we're examining smaller to smaller because we have the tools in the 21st century to do that, it seems reasonable to us to expect to discover the smallest single particle. That if I can just find the smallest particle, then it's the key to understanding. Now, Tassi has a science background, so Tassi, feel free to enter in any time here. So I came up with this idea of the smallest brick. The logic corresponds with how we naturally think as people, just being people. The point is that if we can discover the smallest brick, we can then extrapolate towards the whole. I would say, from my understanding, which is really limited, that was the journey earlier on. It's no longer believed like this, but it's really a natural way we think. Of course, let's find the parts and pieces, and if I can understand the parts and pieces, I can understand the whole. For example, on the left, we've got the smallest brick, and in this case, we're going to call it the A particle, an A particle, which means something really, really small, and it has a mass, and it exists at a point in time and space. It's measurable. It has GPS coordinates. it's an A particle. And that's what we're looking for, is that A particle, because it's measurable, because we can measure it and we can define it and verify it that it exists. And that's really natural way to look. But there's a however. In reality, as this search occurs for the smallest, the smallest particle, what physicists actually find is a relationship, not a relation. Well, there is a relationship and many relationships. A relationship among subatomic things. It is about relationship, and that's what this lesson is about. What can we learn from this to inform how we think about relationships? So that's where I'm going with this. So what they find is something that looks like this. There is an A position, and it represents the current position, and there is a future position. I'm going to augment that in a minute. So there's an A and a B, and they're connected with a relationship which looks like a wave. It is a wave, meaning a wave, the nature of a wave, think about a rock in a pond. You throw a rock in the pond, a particle into the pond, it creates a wave. And that wave has a beginning on impact, and it has a process, and it has an ending. A wave, that's what reality looks like at the subatomic level. Yes, there are points of plot along that process, but it's not the process. Reality is a wave. It's a relationship. It has a waving in and a waving out. And there is an A point, a beginning point of the relationship, and there is a future. One important aspect is that there is no well-defined ending to this future B point. Yes, it ends, but it's full of possibility. It's all about possibilities within this relationship. Now, we're taking something that appears to be very simple and we're making it complicated, not by design, but it might be good for us to think about reality from the right-hand side, and we'll extrapolate it out, what that means, rather than A. We tend to think in our relationships that we're moving around like a small marble. And my marble bumped me, I bump into Bill, and I bump into Steve. We're all individual marbles, and we bump into each other, and that's called relationship. Actually, from the scientific world, it's not like that. It is we are invited to be part of something that already exists. It's happening all around us. And we are a part of that. And as we enter that, we become part of that relationship. And that puts relationships in a very different perspective, which actually is in line with what we've already talked about at the practical level. So we got A on the left of what we think generally, but we have the A-B relationship, the relationship on the right, which is actually what science finds. So what's expected is the smallest single particle, but on the right, what is found is wave-like process. It's the whole that is important, not the parts. A relationship, it's within relationships. Like in any wave, you throw a rock into a pond, it creates one wave. But if there are two rocks and you throw it in, those waves are going to intersect and they're going to interact with each other because they are both in process and they're going to affect each other. We'll look at that here in a moment. Relationships cannot be measured because they are in process. Now, the points along the relationship can, but the entire Relationship cannot. And so here is where we get to the idea of quantum mechanics or quantum physics. The word quantum means amount. It's a Latin term that means amount. Uh, amount. Oh, I got it right there. Amount. So when we think of relationships at the most fundamental level of reality, a way to think about it is a packet. It is now you got, whoa, where is he going with this? No, not a marble, but it's a relationship. Right now we are in relationship, even though you're hearing me talk, but there's more going on than what appears to be going on because it's in a relationship. So if we think in terms rather than particle, but we think of packet. I go to the checkout station. Here's the Lucky's story, like we've been talking about. If I'm going in with a particle mindset, I'm looking at transaction. You know, I could be bothered about something. I buy my quart of milk, and let's get through this because I'm late for an appointment. I don't need a. I just want a simple transaction. I want to give you I want it to be checked through, the amount up on the screen. I insert my card, and then I get my milk and I can leave with a receipt. That's a transaction. That's a particle way of thinking. But if I'm more in the mindset of relationship, I'm saying I have no right to do that. I am part of something that's already existing. I don't command or control what's going on here. I'm in line with the other people. And so on the physical, there's nothing really different, but it's a way we look at it. And so I wonder how Martha's day is going. Martha, good morning. Good to see you. Or, whatever. And, how is your day going? Or, wow, it's really cold out there this morning. But in an attempt to enter into that reality at a different perception by engaging that other individual is the kind of thing we're talking about here. A quantum. It is something, a packet, and I get to be a part of that at this moment in time. So what we can learn from quantum science is that it's not about finding the smallest single thing, but rather it's about understanding the relationships at this subatomic reality, which is also true of our big world. That's the only reason we're looking at this. How can I apply what's here on the screen to my big world, my Newtonian world? On the left, we got particle, the looking for the smallest particle. That tends to be interaction that we're talking about. On the right is, man, I'm part of something beautiful, and how can I best engage at the moment? Therefore, as we peer into what is true at the quantum level, we can understand, at least to some degree, the nature of relationships within our big world. That's where we're going with this. So we're going to show a video. We're going to look at Dr. Quantum. Now, this is really cool. And I don't know how this short video is going to come across on the Zoom, but we're going to summarize it on the next slide. It's a short, I don't know how many minutes, but it's short. And Dr. Quantum, who's on the screen there, he is going to do the thing called the double slit experiment. It's a physics experiment. Some of you may know about this and some of you may not. And it's kind of the quantum weirdness of this thing. And it's scientifically verifiable. So if you can't see it, I don't know how it's going to come through, but you can look this up. If you Google Dr. Quantum double slit experiment, the YouTube will come up. And it's part of the movie, What the Bleep. It's called What the Bleep something. and where they go into all this interesting stuff. It's about 10 or 15 years old, but I like Dr. Quantum, and he's got some other stuff, and we're going to look at Dr. Quantum. So while you look at this, this is important. He's going to talk about the big world reality first. What is true? He's going to talk about shooting marbles through a slit. And then he's going to do the same thing with waves and how marbles interact and how waves interact. So it's going to be particles and waves. And then he's going to go, let's go quantum. And so then he's going to show the same thing from a quantum perspective. And the marbles now become electrons, and how electrons interact. And we're going to see some differences, and then I'll summarize those on the slide that follows. So this is going to be fun. Particles are single entities, like we've talked about. Keep this in mind. And waves demonstrate relationship. So particles and waves. So let's go see Dr. Quantum, see how this works.
Here we are, the granddaddy of all quantum weirdness, the infamous double slit experiment. To understand this experiment, we first need to see how particles, or little balls of matter, act. If we randomly shoot a small object, say a marble, at the screen, we see a pattern on the back wall where they went through the slit and hit. Now, if we add a second slit, we would expect to see a second band duplicated to the right. Now, let's look at waves. The waves hit the slit and radiate out, striking the back wall with the most intensity directly in line with the slit. The line of brightness on the back screen shows that intensity. This is similar to the line the marbles make. But when we add the second slit, something different happens. If the top of one wave meets the bottom of another wave, they cancel each other out. So now there is an interference pattern on the back wall. Places where the two tops meet are the highest intensity, the bright lines, and where they cancel, there is nothing. So when we throw things, that is matter, through two slits, we get this, two bands of hits. And with waves, we get an interference pattern of many bands. Good so far. Now, let's go quantum. Electron is a tiny, tiny bit of matter, like a tiny marble. Let's fire a stream through one slit. It behaves just like the marble, a single band. So, if we shoot these tiny bits through two slits, we should get, like the marbles, two bands. What? An interference pattern. We fired electrons, tiny bits of matter through. We get a pattern like waves, not like little marbles. How? How could pieces of matter create an interference pattern like a wave? It doesn't make sense. But physicists are clever. They thought maybe those little balls are bouncing off each other and creating that pattern. So they decide to shoot electrons through one at a time. There is no way they can interfere with each other. But after an hour of this, the same interference pattern is seen to emerge. The conclusion is inescapable. The single electron leaves as a particle, becomes a wave of potentials, goes through both slits, and interferes with itself to hit the wall like a particle. But mathematically, it's even stranger. It goes through both slits and it goes through neither. And it goes through just one and it goes through just the other. All of these possibilities are in superposition with each other. But physicists were completely baffled by this. So they decided to peek and see which slit actually goes through. They put a measuring device by one slit, see which one it went through, and let it fly. But the quantum world is far more mysterious than they could have imagined. When they observed, the electron went back to behaving like a little marble. It produced a pattern of two bands, not an interference pattern of many. The very act of measuring or observing which slit it went through meant it only went through one, not both. The electron decided to act differently. So it was aware it was being watched. And it was here that physicists stepped forever into the strange netherworld of quantum events. What is matter? Bubbles or waves? And waves of what? And what does an observer have to do with any? The observer collapsed the wave function simply by observing.
Okay. I am really curious how,
Dark energy.
how were you guys able to see that? Could you follow it? So it worked. Well, that's cool. That's good. And like I said, if you want to see it again, you can look that up. And it's one of several videos with Dr. Quantum. So the review is this. Now, where this is going is relationships and the fundamentals of relationships that we can learn from the quantum reality. Dr. Quantum started with big world physics first, with marbles. And what he found was marbles shot through one slit produces one vertical pattern. Understandable. Marbles shot through two slits produces two vertical patterns. Really understandable. Then he switched to waves. And remember, he put the water out there, and the waves produced a wave. And when the wave went through one slit, it projected itself, the amplitude of that wave showed up on the back screen with one vertical pattern, and that's wave explainable behavior. And then he put the two slits up there, and this is where the wave hitting the slits, then different parts of the wave would hit it, and it would produce what he called an interference pattern, and as multiple waves. And as those waves interacted, it either dissipated or canceled or amplified. And as a result, these points in time in the process were projected on that back screen in a series of waves, an interference pattern on the wave. You know, coming from an electrical background, this was like every day, the idea of cancellation and amplification within the electrical environment. So I really get that on that left-hand side. But on the quantum world, it's a little different. And the quantum world is part of our world because there's the small world that makes up the big world. Particles shot through one slit, and this would be electrons in this case, produce one vertical. It could be anything at subatomic, photons, electrons. You get one vertical slit. Just it matches the big world. And then and this is where it starts to shift. Particles shot through two slits, produce multiple vertical patterns and they're wave-like reactants. It's wave-like, so it switches. Particles shot through two slits, one at a time. Remember, they thought, well, let's try to find out why we get an interference pattern. And so they did it one at a time. There's no way those electrons could interfere with each other, but it still produced an interference pattern. We have a particle leaving the cannon, and we have a wave. It produces a wave-like reaction or reality. And then we've got, once an observer was introduced, once it was looked at, just looked at, not manipulated, but just observed, observer was present, the particle went back to behaving like a particle, and it maintained that. And that is well. Now, we're going to extrapolate that out to our involvement as the observer, because we're entering into a relationship every single day and many, many times during the day. And so it's our presence that is actually creating, which is actually creating some sort of outcome. The observer created the outcome. And this so blows our minds, but that is what is actually happening. So important points from Dr. Quantum is this: there are particles and there are waves. Particles are points in time and space. Waves are a relationship between what is present in the now and what is possible. What is possible? The big world level, at the big world level, a particle and a wave respond as can be predicted. Very simple. I mean, it's not simple as physics, but we can understand it. At the quantum level, subatomic particles like electrons possess both particle and wave characteristics. And as a reminder, in yellow, quantum means amount versus singularity, like a particle. It's a packet. Think of a packet. So when left alone, the subatomic particles behave as waves. We saw that. When observed, the particles return to behaving as a particle. In other words, it creates an outcome, a verifiable outcome. Thus, being observed determines the outcome. Now, if we look at, I mean, we could deep dive into this. It's so interesting. Like, we think of prayer. You know, I'm actually being involved in something. Now, do we determine reality? I'd stay away from that one. But can we affect outcome according to the quantum reality? Absolutely true. That our choices, when we become involved, create some sort of outcome. This is explained mathematically through the Schrodinger equation, and you can look up Schrodinger equation. This is like the granddaddy of all quantum formulas. That within a relationship there are multiple possibilities. According to Schrodinger, and as demonstrated through the double slit experiment, within waves there exists a current state, A, and numerous future possibilities. There are many B's. Dr. Quantum talked about this when electrons were shot one at a time, producing a wave interference pattern. So this is an illustration. So the electron leaves the cannon as a particle. That's verifiable. It's a particle. It's an electron. And then it travels through the double slit, just like this. It travels through. But what happens, it emerges as a wave, as a possibility. It is moving. It somehow it's creating possibility, and the columns represent those possibilities. It doesn't behave like a particle. Thus, what we have is A is the current state, and the B or the slot represents, the B and the slot are the same thing. There's several possibilities. The A is easy, it's particle, but it turns into several possibilities. And then the wave itself is the relationship between A and B. And here's the entire relationship here, the packet, and that's what's called a, we could call this a wave packet. And again, this isn't hocus pocus. This is what is true at the quantum level. And I think it has huge application to how you and I think about relationships. Just a minute, Bill. On the left-hand side, we've got the realm of predictability. Electron leaves the cannon. We predict it to behave a certain way. And that's true at the big physics, the Newtonian level, but it's not true at the quantum level. It's not predictable. There is, at the quantum level, possibility, and that's what's defined and explained through the Schrodinger equation. When the observer gets involved, as Dr. Quantum, when it's observed, all of the possibilities collapse except one, the one that's chosen by the observer, the one that's observed. And that has huge bearing on how we interact with other people. And briefly, if I'm going to the checkout counter at Lucky's and it's all about transaction, my head is elsewhere because I got an appointment. That's Newtonian way of particle thinking. But if I can go thinking in terms of, gee, I'm part of something here, and my presence has impact in what is going to occur through this transaction, it has huge bearing. I actually have the possibility to leave that transaction and actually depositing something life-giving to Martha behind the counter. It might brighten her day a little bit. And just by being present and realizing what is true at that level. So left hand is predictability, right hand possibility. Bill, you've been patient. What's your comment?
I'm only just to clarify, if you have that cannon shooting that particle, are you saying it can, you're not sure which slit it's going to go through before you see all those random outcomes?
Yeah, it's a mystery.
So it might go through one, it might go through the other.
Or it may not go through either. I mean, mathematically, through the Schrodinger equation, it deals with all that.
So instead of shooting it one time, and then he shoots it again, and then he shoots it again, and you get all those multiple outcomes.
Yeah, as long as it's not being observed. When it's observed, it returns to it's predictable.
So they must choose not to observe it, but they can somehow observe the outcomes.
Yeah, because they see the effect. They're not observing what's happening at the double slit.
Gotcha.
And this is a real experiment. I mean, this is like famous. So it's wild, isn't it? So here's table time. At the most fundamental level of reality, relationships not only exist, but relationship is the reality. This means that the packets of possibilities are not only internally a relationship, but also in relationship with everything else. Think of the rock in the pond idea again. You got one rock, which is one relationship, one wave emanating. But if you throw 2 or 3 rocks in there, those waves are going to interact and affect each other through cancellation or amplification, depending on how those two waves interact. That is closer to understanding what's really going on in our relationships.
Where's John White when we need him?
Yeah, John, reality exists as one comprehensive and all-inclusive relationship brimming with possibility. There's possibility. Here, I mean, the very practical thing that if if I enter into a coffee time with another individual and my head is elsewhere, I'm going to be disengaged, and that interaction is really less than what it can be if I am not only physically present, but I'm also emotionally and focused in on that moment. That's how the practicality of how it carries out. We talk about being in the now, being here. Well, that's that is a way to talk about this at a realm that we can understand. This gets over our head, but it's true, and there's a basis behind this whole thing. So if the above exists at the quantum level, it's also true at the big world level. I'm making an extrapolation that because we are made up of subatomic matter and subatomic reality, what's true there is also true of us. But I'm making that assumption. How does thinking about relationships from this perspective inform how we can think about our day-to-day life experiences? And what I tried to boil it down. Really, another way to ask this is, how can you and I move from marble thinking? And I'm not saying you guys are marble thinkers, but I am. Um, how can we move from marble transactional thinking to packet thinking, which is I'm I'm a guest at this, and I'm entering into something that's already going on, and my being because I'm an observer within this relationship, my presence has meaning. I mean, that's really that's packet thinking versus marble thinking. So, fellas, you guys have all been patient. This is a lot of stuff that we don't normally talk about. And next time, we're not going to meet next week because I'm going to be gone. But the first in March 5th, when we get back, we're going to do it B, and we're going to talk about how do we be an observer? I mean, what the role of the observer and what does that look like? And man, I think it's super interesting. We're going to have biblical texts and just look at some of the words of Jesus from this perspective, which is an illustration. It's a way of thinking. So, having said all that disclaimer, what are your comments on this? This idea.
Well, this will be my last comment, believe it or not. But the differential is that the observer is the active participant. But I think in terms of relationships, the active participant is whether the other person chooses to listen or not. If they're not listening to what the person is saying or doing, they're not being impacted on. If they start listening, then it becomes an observation of itself.
Yeah, that is very true. That's absolutely true.
I think I've lost my marbles.
Hi, Dave. You're very patient, very kind.
How does somebody impact you? You don't get impacted unless you open up and listen to them. And I think listening is actually the function of observing, and then things change.
Shooting out all these marbles, do we cancel each other out?
What's that?
When we shoot all these marbles out, do we just simply cancel each other out?
Well, hopefully we don't. Hopefully we take each other seriously and don't cancel each other out, Carl.
Hey, Mike, I had a thought.
Yeah, Jeff, go, Mr. Profound.
When I thought of waves, when you were talking about tossing a rock into a pond, so I toss myself as the rock into this pond, as my response to somebody, as my interaction with somebody at Lucky's or whatever.
Yeah.
That wave continues to move. And throughout that movement, there are responses, there are actions, there are things that get impacted by that wave along the way.
Yeah.
Not only is my response to Martha behind the counter maybe impactful to her positively or negatively, but then her response to somebody else can have an impact. So whatever I say, and this is relationship, this is where my idea of being careful and mindful in relationships with my words and my actions, because not only am I impacting the person standing in front of me, I could be impacting multiple people through that relationship and their relationship with the person that gets impacted by Martha and et cetera, et cetera. So that to me is the difference between evangelism and discipleship. So if I'm in a discipleship relationship with somebody and that person impacts somebody else and they're in a discipleship relation, then my impact is much more broad than if I'm just out there trying to throw the gospel at people and hope that it sticks with somebody. So I'm sorry, I'm rambling a little bit, but the importance of relationship in this is not just that it impacts that single relationship that I am right there at the moment in with, but it impacts multiple relationships all around me.
And Jeff, that is so helpful. And you are talking exactly from a packet perspective because your presence, Jeff, and my presence matters. And to be cognizant of that at any given moment. Now, we're going to fail, but we don't know. I mean, we don't know of the possibilities of what that means. And we're not talking smoke and mirrors here, Jeff. This is like hardcore belief science. I mean, this is real, and it's us adapting to that way of thinking that creates wonderful possibilities. So
Well, that's why
I'm rambling. Sorry. Yeah.
that's why these rabbit trails pop up all the time. You say something, I hear it, it changes when I say something, someone else hears it, and suddenly we're going down someplace we never expected to go down, but it was influenced by everyone's conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, if we go back to Jesus's words, I mean, we have really done some bunny trails here, Dr. Quantum and particles, marbles, electrons, waves, and we've talked, but then we go back and look at the text, I and you and me, and they and us. This gives us some footing to stand on of how to understand that. We are part of something, and our presence is important, and the presence of others are important as well. How does that make me treat you?
I if I could, Mike, I want to go way back to slide one and what a little bit of what Vince was talking about. So
look at it.
How many of you guys? No, I don't need to look at it. How many of you guys have greeters at church?
Churches do, yeah. They have the badges. They got the real badges.
So what is the intent of that? Is it to greet all the people that are already a part of that body of believers? That's part of it. But for the most part, they're looking for newbies. They're looking for people they don't recognize to welcome them to your body. You know what I'm saying? So when we talk about that openness in our mind and our heart, we should be in relationship with those around us that are part of our faith body, but we should be looking for those that aren't to be able to draw them in because they're there. Like we said earlier, Mike, they're there looking, they are approaching us and they're maybe looking for a church home or whatever. And it's as simple as somebody stopping to say, "Hi, what's your name?" I haven't met you before. Welcome here.
Yeah.
Have such a not only an impact on that person, but an impact then again on the entire body, because that person then becomes part of it. So what I guess what I'm getting at is my tendency is to be kind of closed off. My tendency is to stay within my comfort zone of my friends and my
Right. Yeah.
all that stuff. I'm not one of those guys that's out there looking, and I should be.
All right.
But Jeff, what terrifies me is there's a negative side to this. And you can just as easily affect somebody negatively by being angry or hostile or
Right.
vindictive. And I mean, they can go both directions.
Well, and I think that was the point of that slide, is that openness, that kind of looking for and loving those we don't even already know. Having that mindset of that Christ was saying, if when we are one and we are living together and loving each other, that draws people in, but that draw stops if our interaction with that person is negative rather than positive. And the interaction to be positive starts with he in us, that portion of that scripture. He allows me to hopefully have a positive rather than a negative interaction with somebody else outside.
Right. Thank you. Thanks, Jeff. Great comments this morning, and way to extrapolate that out. The wave idea is something we can all get into. Carl, one last quote or one last interaction, and we gotta wrap it up. But go ahead, Carl.
I think it's really, the church really needs to be reflecting and looking at itself. When you get ready to go out on a date with some fine young lady, we want to go out with them because she is attractive. And my question is the church attractive to the outside world today? And do they want to have what the church has? And boy, that's really important. Are we attractive? And boy, I don't know if we are.
Yeah, good. Thank you, Carl. You guys, again, I want to thank you all for your patience. The only reason we are talking about all this is it's just I'm curious, and Jesus is talking about stuff that goes over my head. I and them and you and me and they and us, perfected in unity, glory. Well, rather than just kind of just going over it quickly, this is fun talking about it. So anyway, that's why we're doing what we're doing. Next week we'll go to part B of this, and then we're going to move on and finish up the chapter. So have
Thank you, Mike.
couple of weeks, guys. Have a good
Thanks,
couple
Mike.
weeks.
Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Thank
We'll
you.
see you in 2 weeks. So,
2 weeks.
So long.
2 weeks. We're still here in Arkansas.